What's interesting about the archaeology of the book of Esther is that we all would have gone to see it firsthand had it not been located in Tehran and in other places. Susa, we'll see other places in Iran. So the fact that it's located in Iran does prevent us from seeing a lot of this firsthand. But I'm soon going to speak about in what museums you can find some of the items we're going to talk about. So I'll take a step back and speak a bit about the historical background of the book of Esther. And it's interesting because it's one of the most archaeologically documented books in Tanakh. The only site I would say that is parallel, lahavdil, is you have, if any of you have been to Ir David, has anyone, by a raise of hand, has anyone here been to the city of David in Jerusalem? Yeah? All right. So yeah, so it's amazing because, again, if it wouldn't be in Iran, we all would have also visited these sites. So I'm going to try and give you a glimpse of these sites, which are in Iran, and speak about the historical background. I see we have in the audience some people who are bigger archaeological and history experts than myself, which is good. You're welcome to give your input. So I'll do my best, but I do acknowledge that A, some people here are history and archaeology whizzes, and B, some of the people I know have been actually in Iran to these places. So without further ado, let's go into this. So first of all, where does the Megillah take place? Obviously, it takes place in the city of Shushan. Now, you know how sometimes you assume something your whole life about something you learned either in kindergarten, in school about Tanakh, and then you're like shocked when you grow up to learn that something that your kindergarten teacher or even high school teacher told you is not like that. So this is one of the things that I just found out this past week researching this. What do we say? The city, Shushan Habira, right? We speak about Shushan as the capital city of the Persian Empire. Well, spoiler alert, it is not the only Bira. In fact, Shushan is only the winter palace. Shushan is the winter palace of Ahashverosh. There's another city that is much more important and much more excavated called Persopolis, which if you translate the Greek, it's Persia polis, which was really heavily documented also by ancient Greek historians, by, I never pronounce it like the Americans do it as well as them, but Herodotus. So he really documents a lot of the life of Ahashverosh. And indeed, Shushan is not the capital. It is Shushan, one of the capitals, but there's two capitals. Ahashverosh goes between Persopolis and Shushan. And interestingly, if you look at the Megillah, a lot of the dates, in fact, most of the dates, and in fact, all of the dates, correct me if I'm wrong, take place between Sukkot and Passover. You don't have any events in the Megillah taking place in, say, the month of Tammuz of Elul. Why? Because Shushan is a southern city, and it's a rather warm city. He's there only during the winter. And so the events that are taking place during the winter. I'm just going to quickly share with you a map so you get an idea of where we are when we're speaking about these things. Let me just put it here. So this is just so you sort of get an idea. Obviously, you recognize the Middle East. I even gave you directions if you want to get from one palace to the other. And there's two cities. They're actually pretty far from one another. You have the city of Shush, which we'll see. You can find all these images on Google Satellite. It's still the palace of Ahashverosh is visible to you from your own home. Here is the city of Shush. This is the city of Shushan. And all the way up here, an 8-hour or 9-hour drive in a car, which means that, you know, in those days with horses, we're talking about a 3-day, at least a 3-day journey. These are the two capital cities of the Persian Empire. So you have Shush, which is Shushan, and you have Persopolis, which is the other capital, which is much bigger and has a lot of the very famous items that were dug up. So what we're focusing on is the city of Shushan, Shush, because that is, for some reason, where Esther is the story of Esther takes place. It's possible that the reason the story takes place in Shush is because very simple. What if you're from Judea, if you're from Israel, where are you more likely to end? Are you more likely to end up hundreds of miles in northern Iran, or are you likely to end close to the Persian Gulf? Probably closer to the Persian Gulf. So that's why the Jews are really located in Shushan. It's just the closer option to Judea. Before I continue, I'm gonna give the option of anyone who has a question, a comment. Does anyone, before we end the geography, I'm going to let anyone who wants to unmute themselves and ask about the geography of Shushan versus Persopolis. Just that idea. Anyone, questions, comments? No? All right, so we're going to continue. Now, when does this take place? When does this story take place? I'm going to show you some of the pictures, and some of the research that was done on this was done by a rabbi in Israel who really did a phenomenal job. I'll give you his name in a second, Rabbi Yehuda Landi. So let's just take a quick look at the time frame of when all this happens. So this is, interestingly, usually when, at least when I'm teaching my students, you say, oh, when did the story of Purim take place? Oh, it took place between the first Beit Rishon and Beit Sheni. Well, that's a mistake. And actually the Ramban, Rabbi Moses Nachmanides, takes this position as well. The story of Purim takes place after the second temple is already in the process of being built. You have King Darius I, who lives in the years 522 BCE to 486 BCE. Then you have the beginning of the building of the second temple, which is 520 BCE. And then you have the inauguration of the second temple, 515 BCE. And Ahashverosh is 586 BCE to 465 BCE. Now, why are the Jews still in Persia, and why are you not hearing so much about Jerusalem? Well, if you take a look in the book of Nehemiah, and this is again part of what the Ramban Nachmanides says, the Beit HaMikdash in Jerusalem was started to be built, but the building was halted by they're called Tzorei Yehuda, which is like calling them haters, right? So when the Jews come to rebuild the second temple in Jerusalem, there's local haters who are already there, and they are trying to get the Persian Empire to stop the Jews from building the temple, and they indeed succeed for some time. And so this pause in the construction of the temple, where the Jews in Judea are in limbo and the Beit HaMikdash is very minimal, is when this story takes place. So this is King Ahashverosh. Now, interestingly, another thing I never knew, what's the king's name? So if you ask every kid, what's the king's name? Well, obviously, it's like, what's the name of George Washington's white horse? The name of King Ahashverosh is obviously Ahashverosh. Well, if you look at the Greek historians from this time, they call him Xerxes. So who's right? Is it Ahashverosh or is it Xerxes? Interestingly, if you take a look at the last chapter of the book of Esther, you'll find the most close to what his name was in Persian. In the last chapter of the book of Esther, there's what we call a Kri and Ktiv. Sometimes in the Torah, something is written a certain way, but our tradition is to pronounce it in a different way. And so in the last chapter of the book of Esther, the name Ahashverosh is written without the Vav. And that's indeed how the Persians at the time mentioned his name. His name was either King Ahashverosh without the Vav, or even without the Aleph. So it was King Chashiarish. So it's either without the Aleph, definitely without the Vavs, was the way that the ancient Persians pronounced his name. Why did the Greeks call him Xerxes? Well, you have to go to your local, any store to find out, where sometimes people, right? It happens to me. My name is Elchanan, and every time I go to passport control or whatever, they can't say a cha, right? So the Greeks couldn't really say much of a cha, and they call him Xerxes. But in fact, his name is King Chashiarish, or basically his name is King Chashiarish. And that's the way he's spelled in the last chapter of the book of Esther. Anyhow, so this king Chashiarsh, Xerxes, Ahashverosh, what have you not, lives in about this year 486, and he's actually very, very well documented, both in terms of archaeology and in terms of the Greek historian Herodotus writes a lot about him and describes him actually similar to what we know. All right, so this is the book of Rabbi Yehuda Landi. He spent decades literally on this. You want to put a face to the name. This is most likely the face of King Ahashverosh. There's a tablet dug in his palace, one from the palace in Persopolis and one in Shusha. And it's him and one person standing behind him. There's a debate among historians if the guy sitting is Ahashverosh or his son Darius, and about 90%, I would say, agree that this is Ahashverosh, but soon we're going to see there's a guy behind him that could be him. Two things that you see in this picture of Ahashverosh sitting that strike you as right out of the Megillah story. This tablet that archaeologists dug. Two things about this that strike you as very familiar from the Megillah. If anyone wants to unmute themselves and share what they think, you're more than welcome to, or put it in the chat. But two things that are in this picture that really strike you as familiar. Anyone see anything that looks familiar? These are two different depictions of Ahashverosh. So one is, and it's contrary to what you have in the kids' books. So he's holding in his hand the Sharvit HaZahav, right? Remember the thing where it says that he's handing it to the queen? Well, it's not like Queen Elizabeth's scepter, which is about 1.5 feet long. This is Sharvit HaZahav. This is really, probably 5-6 feet tall. So that's one thing that is strikingly familiar from the Megillah, that he's always holding his scepter. And the other is that he is holding a cup. And we're going to see soon that both historians and the archaeological evidence document, as you can see in the Megillah, an overwhelming culture of drunkenness and a lot of drinking. In fact, we start off the Megillah with the words, Hashtiya kadat ein ones. You were able to drink in Ahashverosh's party as much as you wanted, and no one would force you. Well, the reason it says that is because in other situations, people were forced. You were given, whatever it is, half a gallon of wine at this official party, and you just had to finish it. And so there was a lot of drinking there, and that's what you see in these findings of Ahashverosh holding that. All right, so here's again Mr. Ahashverosh. Now, this pillar from Ahashverosh's palace can be found in the Louvre in Paris, and there's actually, it's interesting, if you want to know about where items from his palace are found, there's 3 main places. You have the largest collection in the British Museum in London. Then after that, you have in the Louvre. And then you have some items in the Berlin Museum in Berlin and some in the Metropolitan Museum in New York. Now, it's interesting because just a fun geographical current event type of story. How did we get a lot more of the items from Ahashverosh to be featured in museums? Well, about 15 years ago, Iran, which is generally closed to archaeologists, etc., did an exhibit. They wanted to do an exhibit 3,000 years to the Persian Empire, but they had a problem. One of the most exciting items about Iran is in London, in the British Museum. It's called the Cyrus Cylinder. It's where the famous declaration of Cyrus comes and says that the Jews can build the temple in Jerusalem. So the Iranians wanted it. So the British said, you know what, I'll have you a deal. You guys give us some of the exhibits from Persopolis, from Shusha, and we will give you this Cyrus cylinder for a few years. And that exchange allowed for us to learn a lot more about what was going on in Ahashverosh's palace. So as you can see, this is in the Louvre. This is right out of Ahashverosh's palace. And again, it's a very, very plentiful culture, which was with a lot of drinking parties and spending. Interestingly, this item, I don't know if it was taken today, but it was shared today out of Iran. I figured I'd give everyone a fresh look out of Iran. The chief rabbi of Iran, Rabbi Yehuda Gerami, shared on Twitter today a few pictures from Ahashverosh's palace. This is one of them. You see it was an extremely opulent culture with a lot of, I'll show you a few more pictures. He posted, this is the area in Shusha or Susa. And before I go to this map, that is what you have there in both Susa, but even more so in Persopolis. A very interesting thing about life is that we all get, I'm sure, well, I'm not going to ask everyone, but I'm sure you can raise your hand if you've received a package from UPS or FedEx or USPS over the past month, right? I'm sure everyone got that. Yes, okay, good. So where does that come from? That we have this system of delivering where someone can make a product around the world and it arrives efficiently exactly at your house in Stanford or wherever it is. Interestingly, the origin of a large-scale mail operation is the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire are the forefathers of an efficient, large-scale mailing system. And that's why we don't really notice it much, but after big events happen in the Megillah, you have obviously the term haratzim yetzu d'chufim, which means the runners went in an urgent way. They went very quickly, and that's because the Persians had this incredible, very sophisticated system where they had people who were mailmen essentially go all over the empire and send it, and that's why you have this every time Haman makes a decree or there's a decree annulled, then you have it sent all over the empire. And so we're going to see in a second how this aspect of the Megillah is really one that we recognize for history. Now you have the different areas in the Persian Empire. Interestingly, very first chapter of the book of Esther, how many states did Ahashverosh control, right? Where is he from? He's from Hodu Ve'ad Kush, right? He's from India till Kush. Now, but then we say it's 127 provinces. Well, actually, there were 9 main provinces that they divided into, and those provinces had sub-provinces. So when we say 127, these were sort of sub-provinces, but the Persians divided it into 9 different provinces, and those were divided into smaller, what we call city-states. All right, here is the incredible palace of Persopolis, which is the summer palace of King Ahashverosh. Now, as you can see, it is absolutely amazing in its size. I mean, just imagine, I'm going to show you soon a reconstruction of it, but this is what they call in archaeology a one-for-one. Certain things like you can speculate, you're not sure, was this Napoleon's sword? Well, hopefully it was, 50% chance is a good chance. But this is a one-for-one. This is where Ahashverosh's palace was. And it's been dug since the 1800s by archaeologists from mostly Europe. So this is how his palace looks. And then you have Shusha, which I've shown on Google Maps. This is the palace in Shushan, which is a bit smaller. The palace in Shushan was a bit smaller and a bit less lavish. Now, interestingly, if you look at this palace, you really appreciate Esther. It's really, really easy to appreciate because I would say one of the most shocking and somewhat disappointing things to me in learning the book of Esther as an adult is to realize that she first refused, right? Mordechai comes to Esther and he says, they're about to kill us all. And she says, you know what? I wasn't called into the king's court for 30 days. And I don't know if I can do this. And then Mordechai famously tells her, he tells her those famous words that if you are silent now, God will save the Jews in another way, and you and your family will be destroyed. And then she agrees on the condition that he fasts and that the Jews pray for her. But why does she refuse? I mean, come on, just tell the king for a minute. Why is Esther being so reluctant to speak to the king? And when you see this map, you really understand it. Take a look at this map. Absolutely fascinating. So this is the map of the old palace in Shushan. You have, number one, is the first court where the king usually sits. We'll see there's also a room with the throne. You have the second court, and you have the third military court, and then you have four is the throne hall. And then you have a word that actually appears in the book of Daniel, and it's called the Apadna, and it's more of the outdoor hall. And by the way, these little dots that you're seeing here are pillars. Remember those pillars from the Louvre Museum in Paris? Well, it's you have 72 of these beautiful, beautiful pillars. And so just to get in to see the king, it looks like almost, I don't know if anyone here is a maze enthusiast. I know in school I used to do some of those. Anyone here ever like solving, I know crosswords or Wordle was the big thing now, right? But if you ever like doing mazes, that is what we're talking about. We're talking about a place where you don't just get to walk in. It's not like you can just be like, she can turn over and say, honey, can you not kill the Jews? Just to get through into the king's court requires an incredible amount of security, of clearance, of passing through different doorways. You can see it's like a real maze. Like if I ask you how to get from out here to the let's say to chamber 4, which is throne hall, that's not a simple thing. And if you have no clearance, this is like even more than walking into the Situation Room in Washington, because again, to get through all these different rooms is a real feat. It's a real task. And so for Esther to do that was not like she can just say, oh, okay, let me go talk to the king. No, she would have to go through, I don't know where her personal room was, but she would have to go through all this to finally get to the king here. And then if he doesn't give her his scepter, then literally she will be killed. So it wasn't like it wasn't like a joke. It was serious. She had to bypass a very intimidating environment, which, as you can remember from Vashti, was not particularly friendly to women. And so, for her to do this actually was extremely courageous and not to be taken for granted. And you can imagine Mordechai, if you want to imagine Mordechai, and then you have Mordechai Yoshev B'Shar HaMelech, right? So Mordechai is sitting at the gate. He is hanging out much, much farther away than Esther, hence the need to have a mediator. You have Hatach going in between the two of them with messages, etc. But it's just important, I think, even though this drawing of the palace is not a picture, I think it really gives you an appreciation for the Megillah, and particularly for what Esther had to go through in order to advocate for the Jewish people in front of Ahashverosh. It was not something simple at all. All right, so with that in mind, we'll go to the next place, which is a reconstruction of the palace. I believe this is actually the palace in Persopolis, which was constructed in a similar way. You can see out here is the Apadna, where you receive the audience. And in here is more of the king's throne and the more official internal business. And then you have Mordechai Yoshev B'Shar HaMelech, right there, the entrance to the street where Mordechai lo yichra lo yishtachaveh, he will not bow down. So it's just good to get sort of a visualization of what things might have looked like. Yeah, right. You can imagine Mordechai sitting here where all the street traffic is and where the external gate is, you can even imagine Bigtan and Teresh standing right there at the entrance to that door. You can imagine Esther in one of these rooms right here, the more external rooms, and Ahashverosh doing the most official business right here in the throne's hall. And so for Esther to get through all of this and to find him through all the hallways, not a simple thing at all. So that's your visualization of the royal palace of Ahashverosh. The next part is, again, this picture that I showed you earlier on. There's speculation. Who is Darius? Who is the father and who is the son? Who is Ahashverosh and who is his son Darius II? And so I will leave it to your imagination. But it seems like the majority of experts do agree that this guy on the throne is Ahashverosh or Chashiarish or Xerxes, however you want to call him. But this one of these two people is for sure 100% King Ahashverosh. So this is a tablet that was found, I believe, in Persopolis. All right, so this is just very important because you don't have many of those where it's actually someone from Tanakh. I actually can't think of anyone in Tanakh where you can find an actual depiction of them, right? Even in the city of David, the most you'll get is a coin with a name of someone who worked in the court, or you'll have maybe a menorah drawing. But this is phenomenal because this is someone from Tanakh and an actual one-for-one real depiction of who they were and what they looked like. So it's amazing when you think about it from an archaeological perspective. So yeah, here's someone from Tanakh where we have an actual depiction of what they looked like. All righty. Now, I mentioned the Persian Empire and their phenomenal mail system. Maybe someone would have invented it later, but we have to be thankful to them for some of it. We also have to be thankful to them for Hamantashen, the holiday of Purim, reading the Megillah, the costumes and everything. But this is the Persian Empire. This is sort of a reconstruction of what their mail system looked like. This is, if you want, I'll take a quick summary of it from the BBC site, where the Persians were able to deliver through the use of a system of couriers on horseback known as Piradazis. Now, I don't think it's related to the Hebrew word parashim, but you do have in Megillat Esther, parashim you have aratzim yatzut chufim, but you do have, I believe, also parashim. There's another word in the Megillah, achashdar panim, which we don't have anywhere else. It's not a Hebrew word, and it's also part of this system. So they would carry messages from one end of the massive Persian Empire to the other in a matter of days. According to scholars, a message could be sent from Susa, the administrative capital of the empire in western Iran, to Sardis in what is now Western Turkey in between 7 and 9 days. To be honest, that's faster than some of the packages I order on Amazon. You see, in 9 days, they would cover this incredible amount of space. It says that 2,600 kilometers. And so it's really, really, really phenomenal. So that's something that you see throughout the book of Esther. Now, why is that good and why is that bad? On the one hand, it's good because it's amazing that they had this mail system that benefited us. And it's great that we get to use it today. Why is this a horrible thing? Well, if Haman sends a letter that says that all the Jews should be killed, the disaster is no longer localized. It means that Jews in basically every known corner of the ancient world are all going to face an absolute and complete genocide, a Holocaust. And so to appreciate what the severity of Haman's evil decree was, you have to appreciate also the mail system. You have to appreciate that when the Persians were putting in a decree, when the Persians were saying, you know what, when Haman says, I am going to kill the Jews, that means those letters went out to every single part of the empire. It's interesting. We say Medina u Medina kichtava. The Persian Empire, the way they worked was very interesting. imagine writing French in English letters, right? So the Persian Empire used the same system of letters, but they used it in different languages. Soon I'll show one of their tablets where they wrote on. But they had this language system that simplified also language for everyone. So when you sent a letter to everyone, it went to all over. I see that. I see we're getting some questions, and I'm going to pause here for a second to ask anyone who wants to. If anyone has a question, they can ask it. But here. One question is there an account of the Purim story in the Iranian historical canon? Is there anything in that history? That's a very, very, very good question. What is the actual, story of Purim? From everything I saw, the answer is a small hint. What's the small hint? I'm going to show it in a few moments. There is an account of someone named Mordechai working in the royal court. Besides for that, I didn't see anything because it's hard, it's hard to document internal political affair, right? You can't say, well, Haman got drunk and wanted to kill all the Jews, but thankfully that was canceled. It's very hard to say. We can find archaeological evidence of the story, since by nature of it, the story is a political affair. Thank God it ended up as a political affair and not a outright catastrophe. But the Book of Esther is a masterpiece in politics, and it's called Esther because God's hand is hidden. You don't really see any open miracles. Rather, it's showing you how God has the right people in the right place at the right time. That's really what the essence of this miracle is. So the answer is, in short, any evidence for the Megillah story, besides for the name Mordechai, the lavish palaces of Ahashverosh, there's nothing for the actual story. There is a high level of overlap between the way the Megillah describes both Ahashverosh and Persian culture, as well as what we see in the ancient Greek books and in the depictions on the walls there. But that's a very good question. Anyone else? Questions, comments before we go on? All right. So here we go to the next part. So you had this mail system in ancient Greece. Now, I mentioned Hashtiya Kadat Ein Ones. Imagine going to a government party where the police are there, this army is there, and you get a cup of wine. It wasn't just wine, it was sharp wine. It was wine that had a high alcohol content. And you were told you must drink this all. Now, I personally can drink some Kiddush, but not much more than that. And so it's astonishing to think about it, right? So people had to go to these parties. I don't know what the logic was behind the government doing this, but they used to give people these absolutely large amounts of wine, and you find it all over Persian culture, and you find this cup in the British Museum. So they would take these really large cups of wine and jugs and jars of wine, and they would have people drink from them. And that is why whenever you talk about a party in the Megillah, what's the word for a party? It's a mishteh, because it always involved a lot of drinking. And so when it says again in the beginning of the Megillah, Hashtiya Kadat Ein Ones, which means you can drink, but no one forced you, you can understand from that was a perk. It was not something you always, it's like sometimes you have to check when you order something. You put a box, you check, or when you're flying, I need a kosher meal. So here you had to check. I don't want to be forced to drink a lot of wine. That was like something that was the exception. So the exception was that the Jews were not forced to drink at this party of Ahashverosh, but usually there was an incredible amount of drinking and drunkenness. So the Greek historians describe Ahashverosh as someone who did live that life. And you can take a look here once again. It's actually kind of funny, right? You think of Ahashverosh as this goofy kind of king, and you look at all these pictures and you can understand it, right? He is a goofy kind of guy. There's just all these parties and all this drinking. It's interesting. The Greek historians document, and they write that when Alexander the Great, plundered or took over Persopolis, he took, guess how many camels filled with gold and silver? 5,000 camels. We talk about Avram Avinu bringing 10 camels filled with gold and silver to when Yitzchak is going to marry Rivka. Here we're talking 5,000 camels filled of gold and silver when the Greeks defeat the Persians. And so it was an incredibly, again, opulent and very, very wealthy and very, very, decadent kind of culture. Excellent question. Another question that's coming in here is, how long did it take to carve these pictures and how many people worked on it? So just to give you an idea of what the, I'll give you an idea. I didn't download all the pictures, but I'll give you an idea of what the palace looked like, and just to give you an idea, the amount of work and carving. If you just look at Persopolis, which is a city I did not know about before I prepared this class, it's absolutely incredible, the amount of work here. It just take a look through some of these pictures. The amount of work in these carvings, I don't know how much each one of them took, but we're talking about something that to me is as impressive as at least some of the pyramids. The amount of work here is just unbelievable. And it's from here that I tell you that just from here, 5,000 camels filled with gold and silver travel with Alexander the Great to bring all this gold to Greece. So yeah, it's an incredible amount of work. These carvings, how long did they take? I don't know, but it's similar to what happened in Egypt. We're talking about a culture that is just absolutely filled with spending and building and investing in art. All right, so that is Mr. Ahashverosh and his drinking. A lot of drinking. Again, once again, I'm embarrassed to say this, but you just look at picture after picture of him and his drinking and the society and their drinking. So there's another picture from Persopolis. Now it's interesting. We mentioned the Persians, but we erase another group. We say often in the Megillah, Chel Paras Umadai. The Persians were a combination of both Persia and the empire that they kind of took over, which is the Medians. And in these pictures, often you'll see one person with this kind of square hat and one person of a round hat. And that's because some were Persians and some were Medians, and they gave representation to both. And so this is a combination of both the Median Empire and the Persians. All right, here we go. Someone asked, what about the mentioning of the Megillah? So in one of these many, and I say many because there are thousands of these, thousands of tablets with inscriptions are found in these digs, whether it's in Shusha or Susa or Persopolis. And in this one particularly, there's a guy named Mordechains. So Mr. Mordechains is working in the palace of the king, and his name is found in one of these tablets. The Megillah ends off saying that Mordechai was beloved by most people, and it says that the rabbis were upset at him for stopping to study and stopping his engagement in learning and taking a government position. So you can see confirmed here that indeed he did become an employee of King Ahashverosh. Fascinatingly, one of the biggest proofs for Ahashverosh is found on a cliff. He wasn't just concerned with making sure his name is mentioned in his palaces, but there's this cliff that's filled with, as I said, Medina Kichtava, Am ve'am kilshono. There's a place called Bahitzon, and it's filled with his writing about his glory and his greatness. Alrighty, now I'm going to end up with something that is not a archaeological. Well, I don't want to get into any position on this, but you can be sure that if Iran would not be a country that is not welcoming of Westerns and people from Israel, a lot of people would travel there to the grave of Mordechai and Esther. Well, it's not that simple. Where is the grave of Mordechai and Esther? There are two places, one more famous than the other, with the grave of Mordechai and Esther. One is in Iran, where a lot of people, in a place called Hamadan, where Persian Jews have been going to for about 800 years. In fact, Rabbi Binyamin Metudela, in his travels of the medieval Jewish geographist and historian, when he travels to that area, he says there's this place where Jews are going to visit, and it's they consider it his grave. So this is Carve, Mordechai, and Esther. And then on the other hand, there's a place in Israel in a moshav called the Bira'am that you can see also says Makom Kvarat Mordechai ve'Esther. So it's, and besides for that, there's Rabbi Natan of Breslov who says that Mordechai and Esther are buried in Tiberia. So it's really hard to say that Mordechai and Esther are buried in one place over the other. So of all the archaeological stuff we're talking about, actually, sadly, the findings about Ahashverosh are easier to confirm than the findings about the place of the grave of Mordechai and Esther. But nonetheless, Persian Jews have been going to this site in Hamadan, near a place, by the way, which is called Kever Daniel, for about 800 years. So that is that. I am going to, at this point, before I take questions, really, again, make a very big, give a very big thank you to, first of all, Michael Feldstein, who's always making sure to encourage and inspire Jewish life and make sure that there's learning opportunities and educational opportunities, and to the Bicultural School for its incredible hospitality and always making sure that the fire and flame of Torah, which we see now, is so old and has been, whether you're in Persia, Babylonia, or in Connecticut, it's always there burning, the flame of Torah is burning proud. So thank you. And really open up to any questions or comments. I hope people are able to unmute themselves. But yeah, if you have questions, comments, I'd love to hear. Anyone with thoughts, questions, comments? And if not, really, oh, I see we have one question here. So yeah, please.
Do we know if Esther had any children?
So the going theory is that King Darius II is her son. And that kind of explains, I mentioned that the temple in Jerusalem's construction has been stalled. So it helps when the next king is actually Jewish to help, move things along bureaucratically. So there are many people who believe that Darius II is her son. So not only does she have a child, her son is the next emperor. Well, emperor of a declining empire, which is then taken over by the Greeks. So does that answer it?
Yep.
Yeah. Terrific. All right. Anyone else? Otherwise, again, thank you so much. And more important than anything, make sure you have yourself a happy Purim, a Freilichen Purim. Make sure you eat hamantashen, but not too much. You drink some wine, but not too much. And that it's a happy and safe Purim for everyone. And don't forget your Megillah, Mishloach, Manot. I call it the 7 M's. Why 7 M's? You have Mikra, Megillah, Mishloach with no Manot, Matanot, Mishteh, and wait, I'm missing something. You have Mikra, Megillah, Mishloach, Manot, Matanot, Levionim, Mishteh, and if you remember tomorrow, also Machatzit HaShekel, to give half a shekel to tzedakah on Tanit Esther. So wishing everyone a very, very happy Purim. And I see one more question. Yeah. Sorry. Yes.
You said that the construction of the Second Temple was halted because there was a lot of opposition
Yes.
in Israel itself, or in
Correct.
Judea. Who was the opposition?
So that's actually described in a lot of detail in the book of Nehemiah. The opposition are the local people who sort of built themselves up while the Jews were in exile. And so it's the people who are the Shomronim, or they're really referred to in a very ungracious way. They are referred to as Tzorerei Yehuda, the enemies of Judea. And they're constantly sending letters to Persia, maligning the Jews and advocating for a construction halt in Judea. Okay. All right. So, Freilichen Purim to everyone. Happy Purim. Thank you for taking the time to listen, to be here. It's good to see everyone. Thank you to everyone. And a very, very, very happy Purim. Special thanks to Michael for organizing, and to my great aunt, who's also here. Happy Purim to everyone.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Poupko. Actually, there is one more question I see in the chat. Any reliefs of queens anywhere that could be Esther?
What do you mean by reliefs? Is there anything like you mean a carving or something that can show the?
I guess.
No, I didn't see anything about that. You have, it's interestingly, Vashti. In some way, Vashti is not mentioned either, but the word Vashti in Persian just means beautiful. So even Vashti, we don't have much on. We just know that Vashti in Persian, in ancient Persian, means they would call her the beautiful one. But besides for that, as you can see in the Megillah, they were not particularly gracious or nice to women. You see the way Haman spoke, etc. So there's nothing about Esther either, except for in our sources.
Thank you very much. Wishing everyone a happy Purim on behalf of the CCE. And we look forward to upcoming programs that we can bring to the community and the larger Jewish community outside of Stanford as well.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank you.